Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Doranforth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each week, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations from the world of Australian and global politics, culture and ideas. Right. Good morning and welcome back, Curtinistas. My name's Nick Doranforth, Executive Director of the JCRC. I'm joined again by Samurai Simon Welsh, Co-Director of Redbridge Group, filling in for Kung Fu Cos Samaras as he dashes around the Mediterranean. We've got a fascinating guest today joining us on the pod. And instead of giving you a long intro, we're going to let him tell his own story, but we're delighted and thrilled to have Ronnie Hayden, who is the Victorian Branch Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union, Australia's oldest and mightiest union. I have to say that because I'm also a member of the AWEU. Ronnie's got a fascinating backstory and we'll let him tell his own backstory. But firstly, welcome back, Simon. Ronnie Hayden, welcome to Curtin's Cast.
Great to be here.
It's been a long time since we've seen each other.
It certainly has.
Ronnie, continuing the Irish theme, we had Liam Byrne last week. Ronnie, you were born in Ireland and you made your way to Australia. Tell us about growing up in Ireland.
I grew up in Ireland in Dublin, just on the Dublin Wicklow Mountains, and started off in commission flats, then moved into commission housing, where my mum still lives. Then decided to come out here one day. I was 20 when I came out. And people have always asked me, like, why Australia? And when my mum and dad got married, they were going to elope with my dad's best mate, and they were going to elope to Australia. And mum and dad chickened out and stayed back in Dublin. And so I could have been born an Aussie. How cool would that have been? But my dad's mate used to come back every few years, and he had a great tan, cool accent, and lots of money. And I just assumed that's what it was like in Australia. So it was like, I'm going there. Didn't realise, well, that's just what happens when you're on holidays, because he was coming home for a holiday. But it was in my head then, I'm going to Australia one day.
And you're here. You haven't lost the Irish accent. It's still there. Tell us about the family growing up in Ireland. Was there a history of union activism in the family?
My uncle is a union delegate for the ESB, the Electricity Supply Board. I got photographs in my office of him walking all the members out the gate. And Granddad was pretty proud unionist as well. Got to be careful when I say unionist and being Irish, because I wore a T-shirt once that said, "This is what a unionist looked like," and I nearly got shot by my family. They were like, "Get that thing off you."
But I can't see you in orange marches, mate.
So, Granddad was. But for me, unions weren't huge until I came to Australia.
And what was it when you came to Australia that put it at the forefront?
Well, I came out first. I was working in hospitality, didn't see a union then, but went over to Western Australia and joined the Police and Nurses Union over there and saw the support that they had. I was in the police academy, and that was my first bite of a union with hey, if something's going wrong, you've got someone to call. Came back to Victoria, got into construction, and of course, once you're in construction, you're in a union. So, and became a delegate, health and safety rep, and pushed through that for, I think I would have been in construction for about 10 years, just over 10 years.
You're in the hospitality game for a while. You're running your own cafe.
So
I'm totally verbally here. Did you have a little side hustle as a DJ as well for a period?
No.
Or am I making that up?
You're making that up, but you are good at making stuff. I'll give it a crack. I did, when I came out first, I worked in a nightclub in Chapel Street.
That's it.
And I was living in Carrum, and I used to have to walk home each night because the trains used to finish at about midnight. So I'd finish work about 1 o'clock, and then I'd have to walk home. It'd take about 4.5 hours to walk home. Then I met my now wife, Sarah. We met after I was here for about 6 months, and went for that. Started working then managed a pizza shop, and managed a Lone Star Steakhouse, and went from that to Perth. Lone Star sent me over to Perth, joined the police force, came back, bought my own pub for a couple of years up in the Yarra Valley. And then from there, got into construction because I had construction workers coming into the pub all the time, and they always had lots of money. And usually if it was raining, they were in early. And I learned about this, rained off. And I thought, this is great. So got a job and sold the pub, got a job in construction, and was in building construction first, then went from that into tunneling. And then after a while, my wife said, look, your hours are too long. We're doing 6 12-hour day shifts and then 5 12-hour night shifts. And wife would turn around and say, kids don't see you, you're cranky all the time. Time to finish up. So quit. And then Caesar Mellum rang me up and offered me a job as an organiser down in Portland. Sold the house, put the kids in the car and drove to Portland.
And was it just timing that made you want to join as a union organiser, or was there other things you thought you were ready and looking for in your career and in your experience of being part of the union movement?
Once I became a delegate, I like arguing with people, and I like arguing for people. So doing that as a delegate was something I really enjoyed doing. And to be able to then, it's hard as a delegate to do it because that person you're arguing with is still your boss. And you get treated differently a lot of times, and they'll do it so subtle. But to do it as an organiser means you can go back and argue with them again, and they are now not your boss. Now you're arguing on behalf of the entire membership, and that's just so much more fun.
I know about Portland, I know about the industry, but tell us about the workers that you represented there.
So the main, the main membership down there was Alcoa, making the aluminium. But I looked after from Colac to Portland and then up to Warwick-Nabil. So past Horsham and up to Warwick-Nabil. So pretty much the southwest of the state. Probably be doing between 150 and 180,000 kilometres a year in driving. Whilst Alcoa was one of our biggest shops, it's well structured and had a strong delegate structure, and the delegates were able to pretty much run the whole show there. I had more enjoyment going out to the smaller sites, the small rural sites like the Grain Corps, where you might only have a few people out there, forest firefighters, getting out and amongst the members in the rural towns was always a lot more enjoyable.
And then you were promoted to lead regional organiser. We discussed this with Liam Byrne last week. Just the distinctive nature of Australian unionism is the coverage of rural and regional Australia, and the AWU is at the heart of that. So give our listeners a sense of the AWU's coverage. It is just, I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to write the history of the AWU. Give people a sense of the breadth and the depth of the workforce and the type of workers which you represented and the AWU obviously still represent. Because it's quite extraordinary.
It is, yeah.
We can expend the whole podcast.
Yeah, well, that was like, how much time do we have? But we've got the widest rules of any union in the country. We cover shearers, meat industry, glass industry, steel industry, aluminium, construction, civil construction, tunnels. It's just such a wide... Funeral workers. Craigie would have got me on that one. Pretty much we're called the Australian Workers Union because if you're a worker, we could possibly cover you.
And do you find, does that ever cause conflicts of interest? And how do you manage any of those tensions that maybe come from such a broad remit?
Is in conflicts with other people or?
Oh, and just in terms of, trying to cover a range of industries, and what you might do over here for one might, disadvantage another group over here? Whether those sorts, even if they do arise, but
not really. We will always push to try and get the best terms and conditions for the workers that we're representing, and I can't think of a time where getting one group of workers in one area a decent outcome was going to have a negative impact on another group of workers. I guess the hard part is there are a lot of unions that look after pretty much one industry, so they can pick up that award and go through that award and understand that award. So when they're negotiating or when they're having disputes, they can go, well, this is my award. For us, and for me as a new organiser going down to Portland, I was just looking after everything and trying to work out which award they were under, trying to then understand what was in that award before you could build on an agreement. That was probably one of the challenging things.
One big challenge, you moved back to Melbourne in 2016 and became lead construction organiser. Big part of the AWU's coverage. Complex, challenging, often dangerous industry. And, I heard you and Simon were chatting before we went live. One of the mega challenges for you was dealing with COVID. Let's deep dive into the COVID,
I think
experience.
For us with the COVID piece, I was living down in Geelong, so I had to go through the ring of steel every day. But our organisers still worked every day. A significant number of our industries were still running, certainly civil construction, but trying to get through how complex it was with trying to deal with members' issues, with the unsureties. People just ring the union when they're having a problem. And some of those problems we were looking at saying, this is out of our hands. We can't stop COVID. Sorry. Like when you think of that time, like 2020, 21, when you were looking back, if you look back on it now, it still feels like it was a dream and a silly dream that you would go, how could you even dream that? That could never have happened. And it happened. Like they shut down industries. Everyone had to stay at home. You weren't allowed to go any more than 5 kilometers from your home. It's like a Stephen King movie. And yet we had to try and work through that with our membership and try and make sure that our members had realistic expectations on what results could be in that space.
Our research, a lot of what our research is around perception and expectation and those sorts of things. I'm just interested in your experience over the journey as a union organiser and beyond, whether you feel like members' expectations have changed. Are they different now than when you first got into that role, and how you sort of see that change progressing? Where to from here sort of thing?
I don't know whether it's changed. The members join a union, they expect us to negotiate fair and reasonable outcome. They always want more money.
Funny that.
It is funny, isn't it? But a lot now, I guess, through education, a lot of the members now looking at that, more of that power piece. We talk to our members about, look, we could probably get you a 5% pay increase, but if we don't fix certain clauses in your agreements, then it might be easier for the employer to get rid of you, and then your 5% means nothing. So it's more important to make sure we fix up your terms in your agreement and your protections to make sure that you can keep your job. And that's starting to resonate now. They still go, great, well, fix that and get us more money. But they understand the importance of even things like income protection, trying to make sure that we're getting income protection into agreements. Going back 4, 5, 6 years, members really didn't care. Now there's a much bigger push on it saying we need this in our agreement because they've seen some of their workmates go out sick and not be able to pay a wage.
Yeah, we certainly see in our research across a whole range of cohorts a degree of vulnerability around job security and then, of course, personal economic security that flows from that. That doesn't surprise me. It's important.
Yeah. Yeah, to talk to workers about getting an income protection clause in your agreement to make sure that if you get sick, I've had too many members ring me saying that they'd gotten sick, they're not able to work, and can the union do anything for them? And unfortunately, the fees that we charge as a union don't allow us to cover your wage. It's just something we can't do.
Before we sort of jump ahead, you became state secretary on 1st of July 2023. Tell us about some of the people in and around the AWU who inspired you and mentored you. And it's a big role. I think that people don't quite...
Yeah,
it is an all-consuming role. We've talked a fair bit about the industrial angle, but there's a political angle as well. It's an all-consuming role. And I don't think people understand just how all-consuming it can be. But who are some of the key people that you looked up to and inspired you?
I would say the key person that I looked up to and inspired me was Caesar Mellum. Caesar was the one that employed me when I started as an organizer. He was the one that rang me up and asked me if I wanted the job. He then sent me all the way down to Portland, so I don't know how much he loved me. But when I went in to meet with him, he had said to me, Ronnie, I don't care whether or not you like me, but you honour the seat. He said, you don't have to honour the person, you have to honour the seat. And if I'm sitting here as a secretary, then you do as I say, because that's my job. And whoever comes after me, you honour that person. So it was always a honour the seat, which I took a lot out of that. And then through the years, I would continuously contact Caesar, even after he'd moved on. And there'd be times I'd say to him, what were you thinking employing me? I had no idea what I was doing. I was a delegate, and I was a good delegate, and I was a good health and safety rep. But as I said earlier on, I was a delegate on a construction, like on a tunnel job. And we had one agreement. I didn't need anything else. All I needed was that agreement. So going from there to now trying to find out which awards to cover which industries and going out and trying to negotiate them. And even our agreement was negotiated by Caesar. Now I'm standing as an organizer saying, wow, how the hell do I do that? And Caesar worked with me all through that. So Caesar would have been, I guess, the main person that I was able to, and I still do as a sounding board. I can still give him a call and say, what the hell would you do in these circumstances?
And Caesar also came from the shop floor, as well. With he started out with the Federated Iron Workers.
That's right.
Back in the day. On your way to becoming state secretary, it wasn't an easy process. I know that you overcame a number of significant personal obstacles. One is that you're actually dyslexic, and I heard you speak really powerfully about this at the 2023 Victorian AWU ball. I'm just wondering whether, if you're comfortable, you could give listeners insight into how you overcame some of what others might describe as significant obstacles.
Yeah, it was an interesting journey. All my life, I've been told that I was a waste of space. As a kid, going through primary school, my principal had said to me at the end that if I don't end up in jail, I'd amaze everybody in the school. At 15, they kicked me out of secondary school and wouldn't even let my younger brother attend the same school because I was such a waste of their time. And then I came to Australia, head down, arse up, and just kept on working. Met my wife, and my wife had said to me she saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself, and kept on pushing me and encouraging me to be a better person. And then I became an organizer of the AWU. And as you would imagine, being an organizer, there's lots of things to reading through enterprise agreements and awards and acts. And I noticed it was taking me probably 3 or 4 hours to do something that others were doing in an hour. But I just needed to work harder. And then at the age of 49, my wife suggested I go and get tested, and I went and got tested and got diagnosed as dyslexic, ADHD, and autistic. And it gave me a feeling of bittersweet. I looked back and thought, imagine if I had had this diagnosis when I was a kid, then I would have known how my brain worked, and I would have been able to adapt a lot earlier, and those supports around me might have been more readily available. But then the sweet part of it was I had the diagnosis now, and I just made sure that I surrounded myself in people that helped me with decision making. I'm not ashamed of the fact that I'm dyslexic. And in fact, I'm quite proud of the fact that being dyslexic, autistic, and ADHD, and I still rise to become the Secretary of the Australian Workers' Union. So,
yes, obstacles, challenges, but we're all going through obstacles and challenges. And if we can identify them and get the support around us that we need, anything's possible. That's something that you got to love about this awesome country.
So you become State Secretary, mate. What has surprised you the most about the role?
How little I knew. I never desired to be the secretary. I loved working down in Portland. It was great. It was a great town to raise the kids. And my wife said, hey, time to start thinking about moving back to Melbourne because the kids are going to be going to university and stuff. And I actually said to her, if I move back to Melbourne, I'm going to get involved in all of that politics stuff, all of the office politics. I'm down in Portland by myself. Nobody checks in on me. It's great. I can just go to work, do my job. And she said, no, I think it's time to move back. And at the same time, Ben Davis, who was then the State Secretary, had reached out and said, look, we might need you to come back and lead the construction team. So I came back for it, but to become secretary was never on the radar. It wasn't something, it was just I'll come back and I'll lead the construction team. It wasn't until I was back for a while and then started getting into that office politics and start looking at areas that I thought we could help and more improvement. And then Ben was starting to finish up. He was talking about time for him to go. And we looked around and was like, who else? So I put my hand up. And like I said, what I didn't know the ALP stuff.
One of the unfortunate trends that I've seen develop over the last few decades is in terms of labour boom activism, you'll have people join the Labor Party first and then the union second. So for me, it was union first.
Yeah.
The shoppies, first because I was working in retail, and then the ALP. And you could sort of similar story. You're a union guy, worker, union guy first, Labor politics second. So you almost need a PhD, you need a doctorate to understand the workings of the Victorian Labor Party at times.
Yeah.
Right? So that would have been a steep learning curve. But you've been climbing that curve very, very adeptly.
I surrounded myself with people that knew what they were doing. I don't need to know how to do everything. I just need to make sure I've got people on my team that know how to do it and that I can trust those people. And that's what I did. I did that with the ALP stuff. And one of the hard parts I never really thought about before I stepped into the role was you're going from an organizer to a boss. And I'd gone through the last 15 years just attacking bosses. And now all of a sudden I'm a boss. And I have to try and be a boss and run a budget and make sure that everyone's doing what they're supposed to be doing while still making sure that we as a union are holding our union values. And I found that really hard.
I hadn't thought about that way. That's really interesting. Can I ask a controversial question? Does being an affiliated union with the ALP, it's an important part of the job, but do you feel like it's distraction at time from the sort of core role of industrial representation?
I think it's extremely important to have that affiliation. I didn't have a deep love for the ALP. Growing up in Ireland, you learn not to talk politics. So I came out here and I was happily just head in the clouds, didn't care. Caesar was the one back in, it would have been about 2009, that just said, hey, you should consider joining the ALP. And I did because he suggested it, and I trusted the guy. I let it lapse after a year because I just went, it's all crap. Nobody listens to anyone. And then as I was looking at, once again, stepping into that leadership role, I thought, okay, better pick it up again because it's going to be important. And Shorten came and spoke to me and Caesar spoke to me and I was like, yeah, I understand. I'll do what has to be done. I didn't realize the extent that it was going to become part of my life. I just thought it was just going to be
You get dragged to dinners in Sydney.
You get dragged, yes. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it is a distraction because you're trying to run that side of it. You're trying to run like with our AW and ALP members, and then you're also trying to run a union. And also, I'm a dad of 5. I've got 5 kids, so it's trying to juggle.
On that, you've got 5 kids, but you and your beautiful wife Sarah, you fostered.
Yes, we fostered 55 kids. So we
wow,
3 biological kids, and then adopted 2 from Taiwan and 55 fosters.
How do you even do that, Ronnie?
Well, you did mention, I did say that I was out doing all the work. I had a wife at home that was looking after everything.
Talk us through that. The why and what I suppose. What are you hoping to do for these kids? And just a little bit of that sort of human story.
So with the fostering, when I met Sarah, she had always wanted to adopt. So she had always said, once we've had our own biological children, I want to adopt into country. And I said, look, probably not my cup of tea. Happy to, if you want 5 kids, we can have 5. If you want 10, we can have 10. Like, I don't mind. But she had said, no, look, I think 3 would be good. And then I want to adopt. I didn't know that I could love an adopted child as much as I could love my own. And I had said to her, I think it would be unfair to bring a child into our family that we didn't love the same as we loved it as everyone else. And she had said, no, you'll definitely be able to love a child. And after, I think Hunter was born, a few years after Hunter was born, I think he might have been 6. He's our 3rd. I actually went, I think we can actually do this now. She hadn't come back to me. She hadn't asked again. She's just gone, look, if you're going to be uncomfortable with it, I won't ask again. And I just went to her and I said, I think it's time to start the process. So we started the process. It took 6 years from when we made the first contact to when Sue came home. And in that period, we started fostering because we saw the need. There is such a huge need for foster carers. So we had the youngest child that came home was 3 weeks old.
Wow.
And she stayed with us until she was 2. The eldest that came home was 14 and she stayed with us until she was 16. So, and then, everything and anything in between.
Do you still stay in touch with the kids?
Some of them stay in touch with Sarah.
Yeah.
And you're not allowed, once you adopt, you're not allowed to foster for a certain number of years because your adopted child will see kids coming and going and then will think that they're going to go at some stage. So to give them that security. Sue came home when he was 6. And then 3 years after that, Xiaofan came home and she was 6. So just by coincidence, they were both 6 when they came home, but not a word of English, which was fun.
Extraordinary story.
Part of being a unionist and a union leader, there are bad stories. What really makes your blood boil when it comes to how working people are treated at work?
When someone gets injured at work and the boss says it was operator error, that's one of the things that gets under my skin more than anything else. It always tends to go to operator error first. And it is very, very rare that it would be operator error. It's usually the tools they were using were the wrong tools. The protections that they had in place, they didn't put other systems around it. I went and met with one of our members who lost both of her legs only 2 months ago. Our Anzac Day, she lost both of her legs at a workplace incident. And she shouldn't have been able to get into that area. When something fell on her, she shouldn't have been able to get there. And in the same workplace, 12 months beforehand, another worker lost one of his legs. And same thing, WorkSafe, it took WorkSafe more than 12 months to do their investigation. If they had done their investigation in a timely manner, I believe that our member from that lost both of her legs would be still walking around today. And then with the industrial manslaughter piece, and I have harped on about this, there's no point having laws saying that we can lock bosses up if we don't lock bosses up. Like if a boss does something negligent and a worker dies as a result of that, then the law says we should be putting them in jail. And when we were out at Ballarat 12 months ago, we had a worker killed in Ballarat. they shouldn't have been doing that job. One seriously injured, one killed.
It's a gold mine, yeah?
Yeah. And they shouldn't have been doing the job. In fact, the supervisor on the job used to do safety for mines, and he outlawed this type of work almost 20 years ago, saying you cannot mine this way, it's unsafe. All of a sudden, when he's now the supervisor, it becomes safe to do it. Nobody came out and told us they were doing it. They were just told to go and do the job. And a worker gets killed on it. That boss knowingly put people in harm. I don't believe for a second that he was hoping someone was going to be killed.
Of course not.
But that's why it's not called murder, it's manslaughter. He didn't intend for it to happen, but it happened, and it happened on his watch. Back then, when we were looking into it, there had been 300 workers killed in Victoria since that law came in. There's only ever been one prosecution, and that prosecution, the boss got some community service and a small fine. When we say the penalty is jail, 300 workers killed, nobody's gone to jail. There's no point having it. We marched for the industrial manslaughter laws, and the politicians stood up and they went, we hear you and we're going to bring these in. And I think they just tickled us. I think they just went, now we gave you what you want, but they're never going to be used. So we're pushing hard in that space.
Yeah, it's one of the things, Ronnie. I ended my history of the AWU talking about the exact experience that you've just described. Unionism is so misunderstood. You've described, workers losing limbs or not coming home. And as I pointed out, I think in the final pages of the history of the AWU, it's the union official. It's someone like Ross Kenner, who's also the president of the AWU, who was looking after the gold miners there. It's the union official who has to go and tell the family, guess what? Their son, their husband, they ain't coming home from work that night.
Yeah, it's also the union official that gets the phone calls from family and friends saying, what are you going to do about it? It's the union official. I think most of our officials have had members ring them up saying, I'm tapping out. I've had enough of this world. As a union official, people think our job is just to go and negotiate an agreement or go and have a look and check if there's anything safe on site that you need to get fixed up. There's so much more in it that our organisers are out there doing.
I was going to pull it back onto some positive for a second.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about. I was going to ask about Ronnie, his proudest moment, but Simon, you jump in.
Yeah, we spoke last week with Liam, sort of touched on the green shoots. I think was the term Liam used around for the union movement. We've been through this period of declining or low growth in membership. We're starting to see some uptick, and I'm just interested in your take on that. Your thoughts, are sort of opportunities, challenges, those sorts of things.
I think this next generation coming through are not afraid to speak up. I think that they have a sense of entitlement, and that can be good and bad. But when it comes to the union movement, I think that they are joining the union because they see I am entitled to something, and I know that I can get a better outcome if we do that as a group rather than as an individual. And I think on that pace as well, we're trying to educate that we're organisers. They are the union. Like the union is a group of workers united. Our job is to organise them. And I think the younger generation are actually seeing that a lot more than the older generation ever did.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, we do a lot of research around this and done research for the movement, as you know. And my generation, Gen X, we were kind of cynical anti-capitalist, but we weren't collective in our thinking the same way that we see all the time in our groups of young people. This brought together by this sort of shared sense of disempowerment and loss of community we talked about last week with Liam. So I think, I think there's huge opportunities there for the movement to be able to tap into. I mean, it's bittersweet at one end because it's human disempowerment and exploitation that's kind of at the core of it. But big opportunities there for the union movement to help.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also all you have to do is look and see like how many protests and pickets are on out there, not necessarily just union ones, but community campaigns that the younger generation are running through. And that is union. Like they may not be in a union, but that is what unity is. So
they're taking collective action.
Yeah. So watching that, I think it's just going to keep getting better.
going to ask, what's your proudest moment, not necessarily as union secretary, but as a unionist? Is there a moment, is there an achievement, could be big, small?
You know, the one that always sits in my head is I was an organiser down in Portland. I was taking Hunter, my son, to his hockey game, and one of my members rang me up and he said, Ronnie, I'm in a heap of trouble. They've just stood me down. And I said, well, just hold on. My son's in the back of the car, and I'll always tell people if there's anyone in the car, particularly if it's my kids, because I was like, don't be swearing. And I said, my son's in the car. I'm about 15 minutes away from dropping him off. I'll give you a call back. And he said, no, I need to talk to you now. So he talked through what was going on. And I said, okay, we'll work through it. And he said before he hung up, and he said, Ronnie, he said, I've got my wife, I've got my 3 kids, and I've got grandkids, and I'm the only one that's earning an income. I cannot afford to lose my job. And I said, that's okay, we'll get it sorted. Hung up from him, dropped my son off and whatever. About 3 months later, we were driving. I was taking him to hockey, and Hunter said to me, he would have been about 7, and he said to me, Dad, how's Macca? And I said, who's Macca? And he said, you know, Macca. And I said, mate, I don't know who you're talking about. And he said, you know the guy that rang you up and he had a dodgy boss and his boss was going to sack him and he didn't do anything wrong, but he had his wife and his kids and his grandkids and he was the only one that was earning money. And I said, oh, yeah. I didn't even think he would have remembered it. Yeah. And I said, yeah, mate. And he said, how is he? And I said, oh, he's okay. And he said, so did he keep his job? And I said, yeah, I went up on the Monday and we worked it all out. And he just stopped and I'm looking at him in the mirror and he said to me, Dad, you know all the nights that you don't get home or when you can't come to my hockey games or when you can't pick me up from school? He said, is that the kind of thing that you're doing? And I said, well, that's kind of what I do. And he said, I'm okay with you missing my soccer games, Dad. Wow. And that just made it all. Yeah. So
beautiful.
It's very sweet. That's very sweet. There are a lot of lows, but that's a very nice high. Ronnie, Simon just mentioned we have seen green shoots. I know the Victorian AWU has been experiencing growth over the last few years after a sort of period of decline. What do you see the sort of new frontier of unionism as? How can the union movement continue to grow? How can it reach those young workers that you were talking about who potentially attracted to collective action, together with Kung Fu cause? We've been talking about Gen Y and Gen Z specifically, that this is a generation who they're actually rebelling against the political system, particularly against the right, against conservatism, because they've copped a raw deal, they're locked out of the housing market or they're renting on really unfair terms. So, but how do we actually convert that sort of angst and anger at the establishment, the system, into not just green shoots, but a really serious revival of unionism, which is not just about a pay rise for a worker here or there. Strong unionism, when you look at the Australian experience, you look at the American experience after the Second World War, Australia after the Second World War, strong unionism goes hand in hand with strong wages growth, strong economy, productivity growth, all the bedrock things which underpin living standards and having a good life.
I'm assuming there was a question in there somewhere.
There was a question there.
The second half, it was a statement. You would think you would
turn into a Dr. Nick.
You're on the podium.
This is where you just answer the question you want to answer.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think firstly, as unions, being plural, we need to be union. We need to unite. We need to stop bickering with each other. We need to stop trying to poach each other's members from all people that are already a member of a union. And start actually going out there and actively looking for those new areas. We're never going to do it while we have to look over our shoulder and fighting amongst ourselves. So I think that's an important piece. I also think when you're looking at the next generation coming through, I guess letting them know what the union actually is important. You're not doing it. I think most young people, or a lot of young people, would look at unions and just go, they are just thugs, because that's the only bit that gets promoted.
Oh, the news, yeah. The 5%.
Yeah.
And on TikTok.
We're not very good at telling the good stories. We get a win and we just roll our sleeves up and keep going. We don't stop and celebrate the wins that we've gotten. And if we were to do that, all unions, if we were to do that a bit more, maybe more people would pay attention to the good stuff that we're doing rather than the bad stuff that you hear every now and again.
Yeah, I think you're onto that. The storytelling is a really important thing. I mentioned Ross Kennedy before there. He's there on TikTok, TikToking away. And I think that's the important part too is we've got to go to where people are. We've got to meet people, young people, where they are. Because I think you're right. When they actually understand there's the big victories, but then the tiny little victories, the story you mentioned before about the bloke at Portland, all these little things that are, the storytelling is really, really important.
That story of Macca is incredibly important because Gen Z, millennial, we know is really around sort of politics of empathy. So they really want to know that institutional leaders, and I'll put unions in that category of institutions, are coming from a position of empathy. So it's often not about the, we won this award claim, it's those human stories. It's those little stories that really put the meaningful flesh on the bone and that sense that they can have someone there on their side in an environment where they feel so disempowered. I think that kind of storytelling is just incredible.
And Nick, you mentioned it earlier on, certainly with the AWU, the Victorian branch, we've got an organiser in every part of the state. So we don't do fly in, we don't do phone service. We've got an organiser in every area of the state. We make sure that if you're paying union fees, if you're paying the same fees in Portland or Mildura as you are in Melbourne, then you get the same service in Portland and Mildura as you would in Melbourne.
It's a widely misunderstood element of the job. Ronnie, Hayden, we could talk about unionism, we could talk about the intricacies of the AWU and ALP politics all day long, all week long, but we have run out of time. Ronnie, thank you so much for joining us on Curtin's Cast this morning.
Thanks for letting me come in.
And Simon, Samurai Simon, thank you again for filling in for Kung Fu Cos. It's been wonderful. But until next week, Curtinistas, it's ciao and arrivederci.